So Matthew, thank you very much for joining me today for this quick Q&A. How are you doing?
Well, thank you very much, Lee, and thank you very much for asking me along.
Fantastic. Obviously there's a lot of things going on in the airport sector this year, but I think the one question that everybody wants to know is, what will be the shape of recovery? How do you see that?
Yeah, well, that is the key question. I like to think of it in three distinct phases. For a lot of airports at the moment, it's just about survival. That depends a little bit on where they're located and what their traffic is like. Anywhere with some domestic or a decent domestic share will obviously have a slightly better prospect than an airport that's entirely dependent on international. But from survival, I think it's fair to say that we can predict a recovery phase. When that recovery phase comes, perhaps in 6 months or 12 months' time, the airports will then begin to build on the parameters that are in place to allow operations to take place under COVID. And that might mean less space, or it might mean restricted operations, but at least they get a chance to begin to have more traffic than they have at the moment. And after that, I think there will be a phase of consolidation. I think they will be working under largely the same kinds of restrictions as during the recovery phase, but at least they'll be able to see some revenue come on stream, and they'll begin to put some business plans together and begin to think about the future. And finally, in some point, maybe 3 years, 4 years' time, airports will start to think about growing again. And hopefully, when they do begin to think about growing, they will have been able to put the technologies and the operational learning they've had to learn in the earlier phases to good use to make for a better, more robust business plan, or a better, more robust strategy going forward.
So, as we mentioned, the phases of recovery, what do you think will be the critical areas here?
I think it's all about how airports turn what they learn during the consolidation phase into a positive benefit. There is some aspects of the future which I think will really relate to what came before. So there were events that were occurring pre-COVID, which are perhaps not yet fully developed. I think we were looking at some of these things as the way forwards. And when that recovery is back in place, when the consolidation is back in place, I think airports will be picking up on a lot of those pre-COVID trends to fully develop their potential. And in fact, I think it will be demanded by the public, because clearly it's driven by customers and it's driven by airlines. So we're looking at things like the changes in commercial patterns. What does airport retail look like? The transition perhaps from holding lots of stock on site and going to a more of an experiential or more of an on-demand model for retail, which may not just be in the airport building. Looking at understanding how operations can be smoothed through touchless technology and easy flow operations. And we're looking at how space could be used more effectively. So whilst the airports are in their recovery phase, they'll have to learn how to do much more with the space they've got available because of the restrictions on operations that they'll have to work under. And I think everybody's objective will be, once their airports are in a position to rebuild their business plan, they can use their space more intelligently, perhaps more flexibly, to get the most out of the assets that they already own.
So as you said, physical space is so crucial, and for us to understand how that's going to be used is also going to be a pivotal point in the strategies moving forward. So what does that actually mean on an operational and a commercial basis?
I think that airports will probably be faced with a situation where some of their traditional revenue sources are not perhaps as strong or as lucrative as they have been used to in the past. I think all airlines are going to have a hard time for quite a long period, and the patterns of travel that we've been used to in the past are perhaps going to change. So airlines themselves are going to have to come up with a new business proposition. That in turn means that the airports will need to work with the airlines to encourage business, to stimulate growth. And that might mean perhaps in the future they won't be able to earn as much through landing charges as they were perhaps used to before. So they'll have to look at other ways of maximising the commercial opportunities that come with their real estate, looking at different ways of developing commercial potential, perhaps by having less operational space, by, for example, moving baggage operations out of terminals, or giving people access to more and different kinds of food and beverage and retail concessions. And that might mean also changing the designation of space in airports in real time. And this is where we've been thinking about how technology will also come into play to allow passengers to understand where they are and to be moved around the buildings more effectively, for passengers to be moved through buildings more quickly through easy flow and touch-free technologies, and also for passengers to receive and interact with more commercial offers along their journey, not just in the airport terminal itself, but from the very front door when they start planning their journey. And I think that airport operators will need to think about the commercial opportunity that comes with the whole trip, not just the part of the journey that exists within the physical boundaries of their airport.
Based on our experience of 2020 so far, how will this shape the future of airport design, or is it already being shaped?
Well, it's, I think, too early to tell exactly what the shape will be. But I think you need to look at some of the key indicators that happened before COVID to then begin to understand how airports will shape up in the future. We've talked about the need to reevaluate the commercial basis of the airports and how they need to think about how they will use their space differently and how they will use technology to leverage the use of the space more effectively. The thing that we haven't talked about thus far is the impact of environmental concerns and the way in which when airports think about consolidating and planning for the future, they also need to look at it through the lens of minimizing carbon and maximizing the opportunity and result that they derive from any both expenditure in capital and carbon in future development. So expansion will have to be weighed not just against a commercial imperative, but also against a carbon imperative. And the reason I say that is we've already seen the impact, particularly in the UK, of the public perception of flight and how that has been already a limiting factor in airports' abilities to expand. And you had 3 stalled planning applications, including Heathrow, pre-COVID. And I think that is indicative of the fact that the public understands that there's a balance to be struck in flight. There are benefits, both personal and economic, that come with flying, but there's also a big environmental impact. And the public wants the aviation industry as a whole, including airports, to address that more explicitly so that they can understand how flight balances both the benefits that come with it as well as the disbenefits. So carbon will be very important. And that means, I think, to a certain extent, that we will be looking not just to reevaluate the development potential of perhaps a smaller amount of space because of restrictions due to economics, but also due to the investment in carbon. And we'll be looking at the benefits that can come from refurbishment and retaining buildings in which a lot of carbon has already been invested, as well as perhaps different ways of evaluating projects in the future, which balance both the carbon expenditure as well as the capital expenditure.
So to summarise, I think you sort of started off with saying we might not know necessarily what will be the shape of the future airport design, but just to summarise, what do we know about the emerging shapes of airports of the future?
Well, there's some things that I think we can say about the feeling of airports, because passenger expectations will continue to grow. So we know that passengers will want to spend time in pleasant spaces. They will put up with a certain amount of disruption. We've got to help plan around perhaps some of the limitations that will come through COVID and health control. But still, nonetheless, people like natural light. They like see where they're going. They like a bit of space in the spaces that they occupy. But that's becoming a little bit more sophisticated now as well. They want to know that they're in safe spaces. They want to know that pollution is minimized. They want to know that the acoustics are comfortable. And there is a growing movement and understanding of well-being. And so passengers want both to feel that they spend time in spaces that are not just beneficial to their health, but perhaps potentially help them recover from an arduous flight or prepare for an arduous flight. So all of these things will continue to be planned into buildings, better spaces, better quality health spaces, and remember also safety for staff. The staff that work in these buildings also have to be in a safe environment. They also need to be more efficient spaces. I think that COVID will naturally promote faster operations and operations with fewer interfaces, which I think also passengers will welcome for the most part. So I can imagine a terminal which has fewer touch points is an extended experience because people understand it perhaps as much through the technology that they have available to them personally through their phone or through the internet. That is also brighter, which has more opportunity for retail, for spending time in the places where passengers want to spend time, and also minimizing the impact of the stress and the potential pollution that's due to the process of flight.
Matthew, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on this. I will see you at the event.
Thank you, Lily. Very good speech.